Yeah, you guys are, I guess, somewhat lucky here, because the only class we've, or the only race we've done a retrospective for so far, or we have retrospective videos of how bad the design used to be, are the goblins actually. Um, all right, so the very important first thing to note is that when we began this project a long time ago, we went through and we designed every race. We went and made kits for them. We try to differentiate the classes to make them interesting. Um, we tried to make the playstyles as diverse and interesting as possible. The the issue is I was looking at the Twitch chat. Sorry. The issue is that when we went through for the first time and did all of that, even though we had the best of intentions and we thought we were doing a good job, we just didn't have enough design experience to be honest with ourselves, or to really know what exactly the parameters of our design needed to be. So all of the stuff that's here for all of these different classes is stuff that's going to have to go, probably. We're going to have to change almost all of it. Um, so what you're going to see here is us excising flesh where it needs excised, figuring out what we want the identity of each class to look like, what we think they should do, how we think they should operate, what we think that means for their story, for their individual character, and in which direction their abilities might take them. Because the last thing we want to do is just create generic classes. What we'd really like to do is create characters that have abilities that make sense, um, according to their own motivations and how they would interact if pressed into a combat scenario. And of course, we can stylize these things and we can hold them to a higher aesthetic value than they would be in a real world because we're operating in a fantasy one. But as best as our ability permits, we should try and have all of these abilities make sense for the character rather than making the character fit the class. Um, so the very first class that we'll work on, since it's the very first one that's here, is the Splicer. And the identity of the Splicer is that he's this goblin who likes tinkering around with dwarven machinery and mechanisms that he runs across. And the goblins as a race,
Well,
and
hold on.
yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
for reference, the goblins. Actually, it's the dwarven homeland, pretty much,
Mhm.
and the dwarves live under the ground, while goblins have little tribes set up right above them.
Yeah, the goblins live on the surface, though it's not a comfortable existence. It's quite cold, so oftentimes the goblins will run down into the caves or the mines and raid a city, and then set up shop there. And so after they're done raiding, a lot of times the things that the dwarves leave behind are quite high tech for the goblins. The Splicer is someone who found dwarven machinery and wanted to figure out how it works. Um, and eventually, as he gets more and more facile with the machinery, perhaps he starts incorporating it into himself in a way. Maybe he has no qualms about that. Um, that's all stuff we'll have to explore. But we did have an idea for um, for how this class would work and what its main mechanic would be a little while ago. So we're going to start with that idea up here, and I think that it's a good one. So cannot be killed, or sorry, rather can be killed, but uh, is not. Summons don't die.
Persistent summons.
Right. Summons do not die.
Oh, we actually have a question from.
For those of us who just joined, what kind of
Yeah.
game is this? Control methods, main mechanics, etc. Right. This is a question that we're going to try and set up in our FAQ to make it a little bit easier for everyone to understand how the game works. But basically, there are three rows on either side: a front row, a middle row, and a back row. and the three rows are pitted against each other. Your team is on one side, and the enemy team is on the other. And you put your melees on the front row against their front row, and then you put your ranged squishier guys on the middle row and back row, and you fight. And the wrinkle to combat is that you have to have someone on the front row. If your last person who's on the front row moves off, if your last tank has to step back and heal, for instance, because he's in range of everyone on their team, and he's just getting hammered down, then the front row that you had disappears, and now the middle row becomes your front row, your back row becomes the middle row, and you're down to two rows, and so on and so forth. You can get down to one row and have just all of your squishies be stuck. So the primary tactic of combat is trying to push their tank line off of the front row. That's not always true. You can pursue other means of victory, um, certainly, but um, that's essentially how it works. I mean, if you wanted to go into how stats work, I think that would be a different conversation in general. But mainly, we create identities that will allow us to operate within the confines of that row based system. So we have tanks, we have DPSs, we've got healers, we've got summoners, we have mages of all sorts, we've got rogues that redirect, rogues that can kind of acquire targets that they ordinarily wouldn't be able to reach. It's more or less classic RPG design. I don't know how to explain it much more than that without more questions. But if you have them, I'd love to answer them. Um, Summons do not die after he is killed, unlike most summons. Whenever a summon kills, revive the Splicer. Alright, so the way it'll work is he can die, but after he dies, his summons don't disappear like with other summoners. They're still bound to him. And what they try and do is harvest the flesh of an enemy by killing them, and that'll bring the Splicer back to life. And I think that's going to be his mechanic at rank 5, probably. That'll be his rank 5 passive. But I don't know exactly if that's going to be the case. I will say that we should probably wholesale get rid of Gobbletronic mechanism. Maybe save the word Gobbletronic if that's something we're interested, but I'm not sure if we are. Junk metal plating.
God, screw that skill.
Yeah. Let's get rid of that.
Something you're gonna learn from the if you go back and watch the highlight on this class is that he's way too overpowered.
Yes, and not in a fun way either. It's not like
it's not fun for you, and it's not fun for anyone else.
Right.
He's anti-fun.
And so what we're doing right now is just getting rid of every single thing. Probably every single thing.
You should instead of leaving those words there, you should put them in like a notepad, because I feel like if they're there, they're going to distract us, and we're going to build around the words.
What I'll do is this. Just put them below us. A lot of the times when we're working through, we have an area below the class itself where we put notes about things we'd like to remember, which can be really helpful. Like this part right here generally doesn't go above the class, it goes below it as a note. Get rid of here. Get rid of that. And the other thing is, when you have work that you've already done, it can be really enticing. As you've seen down below, I don't even really want to get rid of the names, even though Most of them don't fit anymore, if only because they could probably spark an idea later. It's easier sometimes when you have a basis um, for a naming convention, basically, that you can go find words that fit rather than creating the whole convention all over again. Um, but ideas are not the same way. Oftentimes, with ability ideas, you just don't want any of this old stuff to stand in the way of your new ideas. And it can be the hardest thing in the world to just delete 10 abilities of design that you did. Um, but it's been about a year and a half, maybe 2 years, since I went through and did this with another designer. And I have to say, it's pretty poor design. So don't be afraid to go back and edit yourself if you've gotten better, or if you feel you've gotten better. Oftentimes, confidence is just as important, or confidence once you've gotten to a point where, because we were confident when we were making these abilities, but if confidence helps you get through a body of work, then that's good. Because your body of work the first time might not be any good, but um, if you're confident about it, then at least you'll do it. Okay, so we've gotten rid of all of the extraneous information. Now we've got just the name and some notes. Um, and that's probably how it should be. Uh, for, I guess, something to add to your question, Regathian, is that there are two speeds of abilities, as well as passives, and the speeds are basic and active. Basic speed abilities can only be taken during your turn, whereas active speed abilities can be used anytime during a combat cycle. And a combat cycle is from the beginning of your turn until the beginning of your next turn. So you can use an active speed ability on someone else's turn when they're using an ability, for instance, to try and not counter what they're doing, but to influence what they're doing, or maybe redirect an attack if you're a tank. Um, And so when you start out, the other necessary piece of information to add to that is that you only get to use one each turn. You only get to take one basic action and one active action. And basic actions, as well as being basic abilities, are also um, moving from one row to another. Making a basic attack is a basic action. So if you're rank one, if you're level one, and the first thing that you're doing in combat is learning to just attack targets and maybe use one ability, um, you don't want to create an ability that isn't meshing with that. Because generally, at the very beginning, what we want players to be doing is just attacking and using an ability. And if we give them a basic ability that makes it so that they can't attack during a turn, they'll feel that they're missing out on damage, and they're always going to pick the ability because they don't know how to weight these things at this point. But generally, what we try and do is make it so that it's either very clear that the ability is better than the basic attack, or we make the ability that they can use an active so that they can still take their basic action of attacking and use the active ability. It doesn't create any tension on them to choose the right thing initially. Um, I think that's all the pertinent information. So generally, the first ability that we make is like an active, or it's a basic that says attack target enemy, and then it has an effect attached to it. Um, so we'll try and get through all of the different things that you can do, active, basic, and passive, within the first three abilities. The other thing that we want to do within the first three abilities when we're making a class is um, figure out what the primary mechanic of the class is and what the secondary mechanic of the class is. or the tertiary mechanic. Because if you don't have guiding mechanics for the class, it can become very difficult to keep some semblance of similarity from rank 1 all the way to rank 10. Um, you have to have something that has recurring themes, at least in our game, and I think in most games. You want to create a kit that doesn't feel like it's not operating from a level of harmony. You want all of the mechanics that you introduce to have some sort of payoff. Just like in a narrative, you want all of the characters and chapters and side quests you introduce to have a narrative payoff. Um, so, and I guess we could talk about how we want the class in general to pay off narratively, and how these abilities, if they tell a story, are helping to do the same thing. So from rank 1, you want to start with the very beginning of whatever the Splicer's story is. Is it him finding this dwarven device, this mechanism somewhere, after he's been a part of a raid squad on a dwarven city? And he's in these ruins and he sees it and he opens it up, and it's like not a Rubik's Cube, but something like a Tesseract puzzle or something like that. Perhaps not that deadly, but it's very interesting to him and it engrosses him. He becomes very interested in it and he wants to learn it. And he starts learning it, and then he becomes able to summon something, like a little mechanism from the ball. And after that, he's completely hooked. I mean, where does that character go from there? And where can you see him 10 abilities from now, after he's gained a mastery of that action? What does that mean for him? And for us, with the Splicer, given that we want it to become a kit that's based around you dying, perhaps, and then your summons returning you to life, um, I guess we want the character to fuse with those machines, with those devices, and perhaps as a greater sort of symbolic commentary, fuse with dwarven culture, or begin to understand it more. And that has obvious tensions that it creates if the other goblins don't understand it. And perhaps we're getting to a place where the narrative looks relatively cliche. Like, I'm a goblin, I understand dwarven culture, you guys don't get it, we shouldn't be destroying them. But we don't have to take it in that direction at all. It could just be that he understands dwarven culture so well, or dwarven design so well after a point, that he's very good at subverting it and allowing for goblins to attack larger targets over time, and to eventually take out a large city, and that could
It's a
be part of the
very
narrative.
goblin mentality.
Yeah, yeah. The goblins are very like, we take what we can because they're in a socioeconomic condition. They've been put into a place where they've realized that they are perhaps the weakest race, in terms of what kind of influence they're able to wield within this continent. They can't really represent themselves very well. They don't have very much shelter. They don't have an ingrained political system. They don't have housing, really, even. They don't have trade routes. More or less everything that they have is defined by what they can take from this super civilization, the dwarves that have been around for so long. Uh, and so they do. They take quite a bit. And perhaps this is the next natural step along the line. The Splicer not only taking from the dwarves, but also integrating what the dwarves have into himself, what the dwarves have made into himself, designing himself to become a better goblin in general, or to advance the state of goblinhood. Um, Perhaps that rankles a few goblins. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's something that many goblins want, and he starts to create these procedures where he's attaching things to them. And uh, I don't know. I don't know where the narrative goes from there. I'm not on the writing side of the team, so that would have to be something that we'd run by them. And in the future, generally when we start off on a race, we're going to get the narrative team in here, and we're going to talk about what they'd like to see with each race, where they'd like to see the characters going. Uh, but just for the sake of this stream, this will be a rough draft for the Splicer. We probably won't keep all of this design that we create. And if
You
we
never
do,
do.
We never do. Yeah, yeah. Uh, it's really hard to get all the abilities right at the very beginning. In fact, the structure that I've laid out for you guys, active, basic, passive, we probably won't even follow that. Um, there's really no reason to have it there. I just wanted to highlight usually how we go about doing things. Um, so let's think.
Actually,
Go ahead.
I was gonna say I actually thought that specific structure was gonna work pretty well for
It
the
could.
splicer.
It could. We just don't know yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we know we want this guy to be a summoner. We know that right off the bat. And I don't know if we want that to be his primary mechanic, um,
It should be.
but it probably should be. If it's not his primary mechanic, it needs to be something that we introduce as a secondary or a tertiary mechanic very early.
Hmm.
And I don't even think it could be a tertiary mechanic because we want at least three or four of the abilities in his kit working off of summons. Now,
His summon needs to be primary.
primary.
It does.
Interesting. Yeah, I I think you're probably right, but let's try and figure out what the other mechanics would be before we create like a priority system for them.
All right. So you said you wanted
Summoner.
like the summons to scavenge.
Yeah. I want the summons. I want for him to be able to come back from the dead, from what
Isn't
they're able
this
to do.
elfin immortal stuff?
No. Okay, so there's a class called the Immortal. He's in the Dark Elves, and the way he works is um, if he kills himself, he comes back from the dead, and he has a lot of abilities that allow him to put his threshold of health very low, and then deal damage to himself to kill himself. Which means that enemies generally don't want to pursue him because if they don't burst him down all at once, he'll just come back again and get stronger and stronger and stronger every time he dies. What we're trying to do with the Splicer is create a system in which the Splicer himself doesn't matter so
Hmm.
much as the summons matter.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
right, so even if he dies, all he's doing is he's like an effect booster for all of these summons. So maybe all of his passives relate to the summons, and the summons are his primary form of attacking. And if so, then yes, the summons probably should be his primary mechanic. Primary mechanic. Which introduces a whole host of questions. How do we want the summons to act? What are they doing on his turn? How many do you think you're going to be controlling? Because if it's a lot of summons that you're controlling, then they can't be all that powerful or have all that many abilities because your turn will just take ages to complete. Um, if it's a few summons, if it's like big summons that you're calling in, that introduces another host of issues. How complex can they be? How many can you call in at once? Um, these aren't questions that we have to answer right now, but I think if we're looking at the splicer as this guy who takes small parts of things and fuses them into something bigger or something better, then what we should probably start with are small little summons, skittering summons, tiny things
And you did
that
say something about
fuse.
in a supposed backstory that he gets the cube and it opens up and he's able to summon a little creature from it.
Right. Yeah. So I think what will probably happen is you have to get to maybe it's if you can get four little summons,
They like fuse together.
yeah, summons on a row. For those of you just joining in, and I don't even know if I've gone into this because there aren't really any summoner classes in the humans. There are four summon spaces per row. So that means that there are 24 total summon spaces across both formations. On your side there are 12, on the enemy side there are 12. Four on the front, four on the middle, four on the back on each side. Now what that does is it makes it so that if you create a full summoner team, um,
You're
the
gonna have
amount,
problems.
yeah, you're gonna have problems. Basically, it makes it so that the turns don't take a millennia if you have a bunch of summoners because there are just only so many spaces that can be taken up. Um, and so putting four summons on a row would actually be quite difficult. So maybe it should be three.
Yeah.
So if
Especially
you
since they're gonna be maybe right now at low level little. They're
right,
probably gonna have lower health, easy to kill.
the other thing is if you make it three, if you make it four, then you can never get two of these big things, whatever the three little ones make, on the same row.
Right.
But if you make
And
it
that should be a goal.
right, if you make it three, then you can put a big guy after you summon the first one. Then you can fill out the remaining three spaces and create another one, and then move to another row and do that again. You can get three little summons in a row. They fuse into something greater. Um, I don't know exactly which ability that'll be, where that'll start happening. Uh,
Right.
it seems
No.
like something that would be on the summon ability itself, which would
Hmm.
mean that you'd probably be getting it around rank 2, which makes me think that this should probably actually just be a basic like we had before.
I was almost thinking if we were gonna have it summon one little thing, that it could almost be an active at one.
Hmm.
Because you're not doing much. I understand that having a summon on not having it not be a basic is ridiculous. But depending on how small they are and how inconsequential they are by themselves, I could see them just being, oh, he just opens up the cube and this little crabby spider mechanism comes out.
Right.
And since that's not doing much on its own, you'd still probably want a basic attack, even if you're not doing that much damage with your basic attack.
Well, I think the issue narratively of putting it at rank 2, the summon at rank 2, is that now it doesn't make sense with our timeline. I mean, technically we could start earlier and have it be that he's taking part in this siege and it's happening, and then it finishes and then you get this device, and that's rank 2. That's where you find it. But
And you
then
can craft it to a way where he's not. There's no possible way to rank up until after the sequence is over.
right, I mean, we could do all sorts of things like that, but then the question becomes, if we have it at rank 1, um, and I see what you're saying. Like, we could save his rank 1 level up until after, and he finds the thing, and then he gets the ability, and it would all make sense. But let's say, just hypothetically, that we wanted to put this summon ability on rank 2 instead of rank 1.
Right.
Then we have to create a rank 1 that works with summons before we introduce summons. Or we have to
So,
create a rank 1 that works with a tertiary mechanic that we haven't figured out yet.
so essentially, it's gonna be designing backwards like we did with the Cabaretto.
Right. Yeah, we'd have to be designing backwards, which I don't
And
like doing.
yeah, I don't want to do that.
Um, it's not particularly fun. Okay,
I think
so go ahead.
this. I think the summon might. It's probably gonna have to right now, as far as I can see, come in at rank one.
Okay, so if it comes in at rank 1 and if it's inconsequential, then why am I summoning them?
That is a good point.
Right? Like, what kind of yield do I get from spending my mana and putting this thing on the battlefield? What
Well,
is it?
summons can make basic attacks, right?
No, not all summons.
Then this summon can.
Okay, so these summons can basic attack. So each turn when you have a summon out, for however many summons you have, they're each going to make a basic attack.
Since there's so little, they can almost act as if a swarm.
I think we want them to do something passively, perhaps
Yeah.
something that deals damage, but something that doesn't require your input.
Mm,
And then it becomes more about managing them until you get these big things that can do whatever they're going to do on their own.
yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
It's like a prototype robot almost.
So I don't know what we want them to do passively, and this ability is going to take up a lot of text, I
Mm.
think, because we have to. When, all right, so the next question is, when are we introducing the ability that lets you know that if you have three, they upgrade into something bigger? Is that part of rank 1? When I get three on a summon, when I get three on a row, it creates a bigger guy, or does that happen at
Combination sounds like a mechanic all on its own, and it should probably be introduced at 3.
3?
Since it's, and I'm taking combination from the standpoint of it's not just going to be these little things that can combine. You can combine all your different robots or whatever you have, assuming you get more.
Oh lordy. Um, I think what we should do is we should have those little things be a resource for these bigger things that we're
Mm.
creating. So you can, like, if you have these big guys out, they can throw them like bombs or something. Because
Oh yeah.
Because then you
Maybe
have an incentive to keep summoning the little guys, and you have something interesting that you can do with the bigger guys besides just whatever they can
so
do.
maybe they make little tiny basic attacks on their own, but the whole reason to have them is to have them so the big things can throw them.
All right, so let's put that note down. So little summons act as both a component of and resource for the larger summons. Also, if you guys in chat have any questions that you want to ask or anything that you'd like to add at any point in time,
Your ideas are just as valid as ours.
yeah, we don't just want to be talking at you guys. We'd like to make this as interactive as it can possibly be. Um, and trust us, it is no inconvenience to answer questions. We really enjoy it. It adds a lot to what we're doing. So little summons act as both a component of and resource for larger summons. What else? Hmm. I don't know. I don't know what else. Um, Obviously we want this thing where you can be killed, but the summons do not die after you're killed. Okay, so what we should also do is make it so that there are two different types of guys you can combine your little guys into. Two types of upgrade uh, upgrade paths. Here we go. Upgrade binary upgrade path. Upgrade path for little summons. One summon that fills rows with little guy, the smallest summon
Yeah.
fills adjacent rows. That way you can fill up enemy rows too if you put this thing on the front. Smallest summon, comma, one that uses those summons. The reason that you need that is because we're not going to introduce any form of sustain to this class. The sustain is going to hit at rank 5 and it's going to be a passive, and that's going to be death passive. When you're dead, you can't create any more summons.
Can't do anything.
Right. And so if you can't create any more summons and your lifeblood, basically the thing that you have to have happen is for your summons to kill someone for you to come back, then the enemy has a really easy route of just knocking you out of the battle completely, fairly quickly, fairly early on. Basically, they just kill you and then clear the summons that remain. Now, if you make it harder for them by creating a summon that fills rows with more summons, they have to prioritize your summons differently. They have to go after the guy that's spawning things first before they go after the guy that's haranguing them and damaging them. The other thing that we're creating there is a tension. You have one guy who's summoning things, and you have another guy that's using them, but the resource that he's using is also more or less functionally your health bar when you're dead. So, do you want to throw one of these little mechanisms out as a bomb, or do you want to save it as a potential vessel of your life? I mean, if for whatever reason you throw one of these guys, and the next turn the other team wipes a couple of your bigger guys, and you're down to just two mechanisms when you could have had three and created a brand new structure or a brand new large guy, um, you've more or less ended your life because you chose to do that.
So the things you can do while dead are mend structures, which is combining them and choosing how they're spent, right?
They should be able to do that by themselves, I think.
Those structures do.
Whenever you have three on a row, at the beginning at the beginning of each of your turns.
If
Uh,
you have three, they automatically.
I wonder if you even take. Yeah. Okay. So if you're dead, you still death passive. If you are dead, comma, you still have a turn, which I don't think happens generally.
No, it's just gonna skip that person.
Right. So if you're dead, you still have a turn, which means that your summons can still interact. But we should put all of the mechanics on the summons rather than things that you
Mm.
have to do. Summon at the beginning of each of your turns. Beginning of each of your turns, comma, if there are three blanks, little guys, on a row, I have them form a blank or a blank. Right. Okay. So that allows. So that's the rank 3 passive, I think.
Probably, yeah.
3 passive. So the rank 3 passive is the upgrade passive. The rank 1 ability is the active that allows you to summon these guys on your own so that you can expedite production. And perhaps what it allows you to do is summon them irrespective of summon spaces. You can, okay, so rank 1 allows you to summon on the row that you currently occupy, regardless of available summon spaces.
Hmm.
So as long as you're alive, this this ability will allow you to keep on adding small guys to the field, which is useful because your machines won't be able to get past the summon space restriction, but you will. So you staying alive is still fairly useful. It's not as though you just want to be dead and you can stay dead and you don't have to worry about coming back to life. Your operation does run smoothly when you're there, or more smoothly. I just don't know what this basic's gonna do.
Yeah.
Um, that's the real question. I think maybe having another kind of resource, or sorry, having something else that you can do with the summons that you're bringing in will be nice. Something where you, I hate when bold carries over to these. You can use the little summons for something. An ability which allows you to use the little summons for something that benefits you. Benefits you connected to secondary or tertiary mechanic. So I think the thing that we're running into here is that even though we have a primary mechanic that's very well rounded within the first 5 abilities or so, we don't really have a secondary mechanic that we're focusing on. Sure, you have an ability at rank 5 that says that you can stay dead and do things, and perhaps that's a mechanic, like death manipulation. Um, but then the question becomes how much are we centering around the fact that you're dead? Because currently, what the death manipulation is doing is it's acting as a form of sustain, an alternative form of sustain. You don't have to build health, you don't have to build armor because even if you're dead, your setup is still working without you.
Right.
Um, and so it forces the enemy team to go after your summons if they want to deal with you permanently, which is annoying for them because you have basically a Henry Ford style assembly line. Uh,
I mean, you're a goblin. You're supposed to be annoying.
right, right, I agree. Um, and I don't think that we want to play around too much with what's happening while you're dead. I think what
No,
we
that's gonna infringe on stuff that is better for other classes.
right. So I think what a better idea would be is to figure out what exactly sacrificing these summons does for you and to make that into your secondary mechanic or your tertiary mechanic. Generally, the difference between secondary and tertiary for you guys who are watching um, is that a tertiary mechanic tends to be an extrapolation of kind of the most surface level visual kind of representation of the class. Like we have a class who's kind of a lawman, sort of a sheriff or a desperado, and his tertiary mechanic is that when he stays in place, he gains a benefit from it, which is supposed to call to mind these duelists who are standing in the town square and waiting for high noon to shoot at one another. And then we have a cavalier whose tertiary mechanic is movement, which a cavalier should have because he's riding around on his horse or whatever his mount would be, and dashing across the battlefield. What we're looking for here with the Splicer is a tertiary mechanic that does somewhat of the same thing. And I'm not sure what that would be. I mean, it's less obvious, at least, for something like this, what it should be.